Hello, everyone. Welcome to your newest episode of the Cosmic Matrix podcast. And we have a very special guest returning to our podcast again, Mark Jones. So for those who are new to Mark Jones's work, he's an internationally known astrologer, teacher, and consultant, and he blends evolutionary astrology with transpersonal psychotherapy. And his books, Healing the Soul and The Soul Speaks, explore astrology as a tool for healing and soul development and the importance of bringing a therapeutic dimension to astrology. He studied across multiple traditions, including Kabbalistic astrology, psychosynthesis, Noel Till's program, and Jeffrey Wolf Green's evolutionary astrology school, where he became the main teacher. Over the past 20 years, Mark has developed a transformational consultation model that moves beyond a one-time chart reading, helping clients align with their deeper purpose. So in this episode, we'd love to discuss with Mark Uranus entering Gemini again for good, which is going to be on April 25th. Also, we'd like to discuss the concept of Uranus squaring the nodes, which will happen also later, the outer planet shift, and what it means to be standing on the beginning of a new era. So Uranus is going to be the last of the outer planets to enter a new sign for good. So we are moving away from Capricorn, Taurus, and Pisces, and we're moving from an earth and water era into one of fire and air. Uranus first entered Gemini on July 7th, 2025. It retrograded back into Taurus, and then it fully re-entered on April 25th, 2026, where it will remain until 2033. And during this transit, it's going to form a mini triangle pattern with Pluto in Aquarius and Neptune in early Aries. So for those who are new to the astrology of Uranus and Gemini, we do see the shadow side of Gemini already visible. So Uranus is reshaping how we speak, learn, and connect, most visibly through the revolution in AI and now AGI, whose integration into daily life is fueling this rapid change. And the shadows are more related to this short attention span epidemic that we're seeing. So we have 60-second reels and TikToks, which are literally rewiring our brains, and studies showing that the AI writing tools are diminishing students' capacity for critical thinking, memory, and creativity. So we live in an era where clickbait tends to reign supreme. Everyone prefers short clips over long-form content. We have viral material, which is often mimicked and copied from others, infinitely being the fastest way to gain online fame. And your value in general seems to be now measured by who can hold attention the longest. So we're being programmed to skim only the surfaces of things, respond to only the most stimulating input. And you can even see this in astrology itself, where if you search for astrology content now, you're going to find TikToks about placements that mean you'll be famous, or 10 reasons why Geminis are evil, and a bunch of grossly generalized sign descriptions that show basically astrology itself linked to Aquarius, where Pluto currently sits, trining Gemini, is being stripped of its depth. And interestingly, at the same time, we have a counter movement arising where analog lives and phone-free events and cafes without Wi-Fi and anti-social media sentiment is also rising. And interestingly, I saw this headline the other day that said that big tech is now investing billions of dollars in what's being coined IRL, in real life economy, and they're commodifying meetups in person that have become less and less common. And then on another timeline, we have AI relationships, people replacing human relationships with them. And all of this reflects Uranus, Pluto, and the trine between Gemini and Aquarius. Technology is transforming the way we think, communicate, and connect. But interestingly, in evolutionary astrology, Uranus carries a different weight. It relates to long-term memory, past lives, individuation, but also to trauma when too much happens too fast. So Dane Redgar had a great way of describing it, which I think you mentioned in one of your talks, where that Uranian energy disturbs and transforms. So these sudden changes can shock us, but can also deliver profound new insights. And you can feel this collectively right now, that there's this almost pervasive anxiety about the future, a sense that we're standing on the precipice of something really huge. There's AGI predictions multiplying about where this is going to head, and there's really no consensus on which way it's going, and this uncertainty is really a Uranian moment. So that's what we want to explore today, how Uranus in Gemini is already affecting humanity and what the years ahead may hold, how we can consciously work with these energies. So let's just open it up to Mark. Thank you so much. What are you seeing with Uranus and Gemini in this mini triangle, and what themes are already emerging?
Welcome to the podcast, Mark.
Thank you. Yeah, nice to see you both. Really nice. Thank you. What a brilliant introduction. I'm just gonna get my coat. Yeah, well done. Brilliant summary. I mean, it's fasten your seatbelt time, isn't it? When you put it like that. I guess all the outer planets change sign within approximately 18 months. We do notice it in the world, don't we? I mean, the prevailing anxiety I think you talk about is quite profound, and it seems to me involve lots and lots of levels. You know, its apparent manifestation in terms of AI or AGI is largely at this point a projection, isn't it? We're projecting our fears. Now, there are some people who are really working with the powerful tools who are giving us cause to project our fears. I mean, what are we to make of it all, guys? It's very confusing, isn't it? I myself have overcome my resistance to AI, not directly, but, you know, I've inputted, say, enormous amounts of actual text by me, actual books into certain models, say like Claude, and looked at structuring other ideas or what it thinks of certain things. So as a playback for material I already generated, transcripts or original thought, it's been quite an interesting exercise. Obviously, there are coders out there, aren't there, leading a development coding team that is just one supercharged version of Claude. I mean, that's happening. I'd dial it right back. Can most people describe how an old television set worked? Can they describe how their laptop works? I mean, we're so far behind psychologically what these things entail. The Promethean element of Uranus springs to mind. How does one see Prometheus? You know, is Prometheus, lots of astrologers, I think, and lots of kind of hippies and the sort of new age movement see Prometheus as just a hero, bringing fire, bringing the tools, you know, breaking this kind of dictate of the man from Zeus that humanity can't have the fire. And then they look at the punishment as what? Just some kind of cruel afterthought? But I don't know. I think if you looked at that Greek idea, if you look at it from a sort of how we look back at Athens and the foundations of democracy, we see only the outsider hero doing the beautiful thing. If you looked at it in contrast to, say, Jung looking at Job in answer to Job or something like that, what is the punishment? What is it when you go too far? What is it when you steal fire? Have we dealt with that archetypal shadow? Clearly not. You know, Kubrick explores it, doesn't he, in 2001: A Space Odyssey? What is that moment when the obelisks come and the tools start getting raised? Is that the greatest moment of human discovery? Is that us seeding our own end? You know, we've been wrestling with that for, you could argue, mythically, millennia, even before we knew we had these powerful tools. Nuclear, you know, nothing is more powerful than nuclear in many ways. For all the AI and AGI, the nuclear threat is still a real motivator in contemporary world terms. We're still having events happen and wars happen because of the nuclear threat. So what is our relationship fundamentally to our creativity? You know, is creativity man's great gift? Are there limits to it? You know, is Prometheus a hubristic figure, this figure that gets associated with Uranus, the kind of figure that broke through the dictate of the father of the gods to limit humanity's power? If you listen to some of the people, you know, the guy behind DeepMind, and they have a real spiritual inflation, you know, they have this real sense they're just going to do good for the world. And there's no, you know, law of unseen consequences, let's say. There's no hidden kind of issues in the human archetypal shadow, or even just in the nature of the limits of reality. And I would say in this Uranian age, we've also witnessed a flight from Saturn. We've witnessed a complex series of events around the Saturn archetype that reached a culmination, you could say, with COVID and Pluto, Saturn in Capricorn. The COVID era that the world seems to have shaken off like a bad dream, like some lover that it felt disappointed with the next day. The world seems to just pretend like it never slept with that person. You know, it never did these COVID protocols. It never pushed it to the max. Seems to me increasingly a very Pluto and Capricorn phenomena, protecting the old, protecting the pre-existing wealth and damaging the new generation. Because whilst you have this tech revolution on one hand amongst these certain parts of the Bay Area and Silicon Valley and for certain progressive people, a lot of young people, if you look at the mental health statistics, feel completely disenfranchised, don't they? Like there's no world for them. They were out of school for years. Loads of them haven't gone back. They're out of training. They're not joining the military in the UK anymore. I was just reading an article about the stunning drop-off of feeling that the military could be something that could advance your life. There are all these people who are not in training, not in work. So there's a powerful split taking place, isn't there? And then we witness politically and in all sorts of ways, the culture wars have been fueled by this split. So you see this hanging on to Saturn aggressively, this fear around Saturn, the last stages of Pluto and Capricorn, the wealthy holding on to their assets, the health issues of the elderly who've already lived their life. You know, we can just destroy opportunities for young people in the name of this. I mean, I'm not saying it wasn't important to try and save people's lives. I'm all for that. But there were a lot of decisions taken that slanted a certain way. And we're dealing with the consequences in countries like the UK and in a country like Wales, where I live. It's just immediately apparent on the streets. You know, literally every third shop in the town centre is still shut or is in transition. We destroyed our socioeconomic and cultural interrelatedness through hugely extended lockdowns that didn't really do an awful lot with the death rates. So it's in this context that these great tools come in, this kind of sense of Uranian possibility for a few, for a kind of elite, and an increasing disenfranchisement for regular folks, young people who feel distanced. And the flight from Saturn has reached all sorts of corners, hasn't it? The kind of the dream on the one side, the social utopian dreams that seem to animate so many, versus sober realities. Where does all of this come in? And then you made the point about the perspective of evolutionary astrology. I mean, you can't help but see certain traumatic memories behind some of these things. You know, people are, you know, have we really opened up to our psychic wholeness, our emotional and psychic wholeness? It's very hard to, isn't it? I mean, you guys, dedicated people, trying, I'm sure you have your struggles. Me, dedicated person, really trying, position my whole life to try and help people to live in a certain way, certain psychological and spiritual practices. It's still enormously challenging. How do you build like an independent foundation in this shaky world? How do you survive the 21st century with your soul intact? Do we even know we have one anymore? Are we even looking in the right place? The psychic being, or a Bindos phrase for the radiatory capacity of the soul that reaches down into our particular circumstance. This is a kind of living intelligence, which is fundamentally different from the AI, LLM kind of model. And okay, I don't know what's going to happen with AGI, but we can say this about the LLMs, the large language models. They have rapaciously harvested pre-existing human cultural artifacts. That's how they're trained. Google for DeepMind didn't even have enough resources with Google Books. They had to buy other accesses to data. That's how large the data sets are for these algorithms to train the large language models. So they have rapaciously harvested pre-existing human cultural imaginative activity. That's not the same, and that's a talent, I guess, and these algorithms are producing very interesting results, but it's not the same as the living intelligence of the psychic being. It's not the same as the soul impulse. But this insight that seems so natural on one level and so obvious to someone like me in a certain experience, it's going to be hard to hold on to. How do people who haven't touched that, if you haven't touched the domain of the soul really directly, and you don't remember it, you don't have self-remembering, Gurdjieff's phrase about it, how are you supposed to orientate? in
Well,
that. I have so much sympathy. Yeah.
that remembers me, even you mentioned Sri Aurobindo, and I was recently reading him again, and he said that the human being has not evolved past the bygone primitive man in terms of internal realization, but external. Even from the esoteric traditions, Muraviv talks about we had this technological progress, but now evolution in human consciousness. But at the same time, all is one, so to speak. So would you say with Uranus and Gemini, for example, or Pluto and Aquarius as well together, that this technological evolution is inevitable, almost like Sri Aurobindo said, we need to become more hardened in the ignorance before we can break through to our soul being, so to speak. So, I'm trying to understand Uranus and Gemini even in the context of the evolution of consciousness with AI technology as part of it and not like as something separate. You know what I'm kind of trying to hint at?
Yes. I mean, there's a series of things you want to look at. I think of the work of Ian McGilchrist, the split brain work and the fantastic work integrating culture. Because in a way, Uranus and Gemini, emphasized by the trine to Pluto and Aquarius, if Aquarius is about detachment for understanding and Uranus is part of how you detach, we're supposed to see the operation of the mind more clearly, aren't we? And dialogue with our understanding and realize this work I'm going to talk about in the second part today, the work I'm doing on the nodes, clearly shows from the way the nodes are created that they arise instantaneously together. They are the intersection of two orbital planes. The symbol of polarity in astrology is the key. This is one of the insights of Jung in the later works, Aeon and stuff. He talks about the complementary union of the opposites through the conflict has to be part of this new direction we're going into. In a sense, you have to look at Sagittarius for the answer to the Uranus and Gemini problem, just like you have to look at both nodes when you look at nodes. All of astrology is polarity in an alchemical union or dialogue. And in a way, we have to remember the larger intuitive embedded context we're in, don't we, in order to see the mind clearly. Detachment from the mind, if you are centered, is real insights into yourself. But obviously, detachment can easily be disassociation or the worshipping of the false god of the mind in its conceptual operation sense, the worshipping of data rather than truth. Data can help truth. There's going to be some sincere actors here, right? Some of this stuff will lead to good. But to your point about whether we're psychologically ready, I mean, I swear just loads of people are not psychologically ready for air travel. They're not psychologically ready for, all sorts of things that roll right back.
That's true.
Never mind AI. So, yeah.
Yeah, and I don't know if you've ever heard of this book called The Shallows by Nicholas Carr, where he talks about how the internet is basically physically rewiring our brains, and this constant skimming and fragmented attention through the internet is basically training us out of deep, sustained thought. So it kind of connects to what you're saying is that,
yes.
we're if the general person has not touched that part of their soul, then what's going to happen for the average person who's just skimming the internet and losing that capacity for contemplative depth? And, basically the technology is changing us neurologically. And with Uranus being related to individuation and this soul's kind of path to becoming, how do you see technologies playing a role in how they kind of rewire us in that way? Is it possible that we're kind of like also facing a collective crisis of soul development because we're losing the exact capacity we need to individuate to begin with?
So it reminds me of what Cal Newport said in Deep Work, the similar point that this frazzling of the attention is so damaging. It also links back to what we were saying about the COVID era, children not being in a classroom, not being in an embedded space with other students, being isolated. And when you isolate people, just like trauma isolates people, they go into their little dopaminic regulation cycle, don't they? Their little ways of dealing with the isolation that isn't embedded. And that's when these things come in and reach people. And then also the dark arts to some extent here. Some of these people, the companies of social media and stuff, they hire psychologists, just like gaming development does, in order to create an optimal balance of reward versus struggle. Yes, we're programming the young. I mean, I have a 7-year-old, soon to be 8-year-old. I watch a lot of children's television, but there's some I can't bear. Some of it's like ADD television. It's just full of. So the relief when you watch a Studio Ghibli or something with your child and there's a stillness. If I think back to the things me and my sister watched on Sunday afternoons, old black and white movies, old cartoons, they were so still. The pacing was so different. Everything's a frenzy now for that hit. I mean, I think there's a thesis emerged called the Gutenberg parenthesis, which argues that the Gutenberg revolution that happened under Uranus and Gemini, that's when he designed the movable printable type that revolutionized, the Reformation, the publication of the Bible in vernacular languages and not just Latin, which only the priests could read. This revolutionary technology of that time to now is actually a parenthesis in this one, they're kind of like Scandinavian scholars' thesis, i.e., the era of reading started then and ends now.
Mm-hmm. Wow.
And the particular development of consciousness that it brought about, the interior voice, the way that you create worlds inside your own mind because you have to fill in inner pictures to the words you're reading, I guess heightened in the tendency of the 19th century novel going into the 20th century novel, this internal voice following the hero or heroine of the story, is, it turns out, only for a certain period of time, is their thesis, that we're seeing the signs of going away from that literacy, away from that internal and external articulation. And they wrote in the 90s that you would see a rise in populism, a rise in various forms of shouting messaging politically as the articulation of the literate or agreed on culture class disintegrates. And we're seeing increasing signs. It doesn't mean that all populism is just a deterioration, but we notice its anti-elitist credentials that are held on too proudly. We notice the lack of culture in that sense. Culture is seen as what? A needless refinement or a pretentiousness or whatever you want to call it. I am concerned on that level. I'm concerned for my kid. I'm concerned like what's happening. And we have to take her away from the television a lot and into the garden a lot and into just other forms of play. Because just, if you don't have kids, you won't be watching Netflix kids shows. But the pacing is just unbelievable. Like modern movies. I don't like modern movies. It's bang, wallop, crash every 5 seconds, isn't it?
By the way, I don't know, what's his name?
Matt Damon?
Matt Damon and Ben Affleck, they were on Joe Rogan.
Yes.
And Ben Affleck, what's his name? Matt Damon talked about how movie directing and writing has changed. And for Netflix, they're almost instructed when they make movies to, at a certain time, repeat the plot because people have a short attention span to make the plot more understandable right away. So give the story away sooner, basically, so people don't tune out and change the show, for example.
It rests on the assumption that everyone's going to be distracted and half paying attention anyway.
Yeah.
So they have to
because people are distracted by their phones constantly, even while they're watching movies, right? So to keep
it's like the theory of the pop hit, isn't it? Start with the chorus and then have a little bit of verse and go straight back to the chorus. Yeah. I mean, it makes a mockery, doesn't it, of an important event for me psychologically when I was young, reading longer books, out of my depth, reading Lord of the Rings when I'm 11 or something, dealing with powerful changes and it taking days of further reading to get to the thing that happened. Will this person make it? Will this thing happen? Spending a week believing Gandalf was dead, was life-changing in its own way. It's impossible, isn't it, now? It's impossible to have 10 seconds of thinking. Yeah. Well, and in certain things of these frenzies, if you notice, and it's increasingly becoming cartoon-like in adult movies, all these terrible things happen to people, but they're like cartoon characters. They just get up and dust it off. It's like our obsession with superheroes that I would argue is fundamentally adolescent. It's like when we feel the most passionate and disempowered, we fantasize we're so empowered. What kind of world are we where our entertainment has no real relational depth and it doesn't take the consequences of violence or action seriously anymore?
So how would you describe, I would really love to touch on this idea of Uranus and long-term memory and
Hmm.
Uranus as a trauma signature in general, because that was something I first heard through you, is
Yes.
that basically Uranus, planets in Aquarius, planets in the 11th house can signify trauma in a chart and that also relates to long-term memory, meaning like soul memory. So can you just describe that a little bit for people who are new to that concept?
Yeah, I mean, the birth chart, if you think about it, is the ultimate symbol that we're not a blank slate. It is a certain shape, it is a certain pattern. You came in with a certain shape and pattern. Now, of course, in karmic or evolutionary forms of astrology, that becomes about reincarnation. But if you want to sidestep the complexity of the religious or philosophical implications of reincarnation, or whether people have to be believers in a certain tradition, what comes to mind is, for me, is a more simple concept: soul memory. You're carrying certain memories. You have this certain shape or pattern that you're attracted to for real reasons. Did it come through an archetypal domain in some sense that you traveled through? Does it come through the uterine process, the work of Stanislav Grof and the archetypal dynamics of the birth process? Does it come from past lives? Does it comes from the mystery, right? You come from the mystery, but you don't come unformed, this blank piece of paper, right? You come with these certain patterns, these certain memories, these certain sensitivities, and you come into a world created by the history of other people's actions, don't you? As well as other people's memories and psychic sensitivities. This is the complexity of reality. I was thinking about this with trauma, like, because trauma could pertain to, let's say there's a family of three children and the parents are forced to move. The father loses his business and they're forced to downsize, and it's really upsetting. Two of the children deal with it okay. One, who has a certain chart shape, has certain memories of family loss, and it becomes inconsolable and has like a serious problem for multiple years. Maybe they have long-standing anxiety from it. This is the practical revelation of the inbuilt difference. Now, we could look at that psychologically and say, oh, they were all at different ages, but maybe this is the middle child or the older child. It's not just the youngest. Or you could say it's the developmental stage they're at. But when we look at the chart and we see everything in the fourth house, and we see, Uranus aspecting that in a challenging way, we can see that memories are there in this soul memory of this lack of safety, of this abandonment. And we can start to understand why one person has this experience. So you have all these challenging memories that people hold, brought up by life events. Well, one loses someone one loves. It brings up subtle resonance in the soul, doesn't it, of all the losses. It brings up subtle resonance in the soul of all the times with the person you lost that there was a loss even whilst they were alive, in terms of the disconnect. So we have all these resonant dimensions. But then it's, in some ways it's even more complicated than that, because you took the average person in our society right now and its prevailing philosophical trends, materialism, technocracy, sort of late capitalist culture, and you had a very profound experience. Say, like, you experienced the primordial ground of your being just open up. People would feel it was like a precipice. We'd be drowning in our own depth. We have a very complex situation where it seems to me people are carrying obvious patterns within them that get brought up by their experiences that resonate with deeper structures of their psyche. But we're also reaching a point where the deeper structures of the psyche themselves are perceived as problematic because of this tendency, this temptation you guys have beautifully articulated of the present cultural mode. What are we being sold out of? If you see all of this as a temptation, what is our attention that clickbait wants to grab? Fundamentally, it's our psychic being, isn't it? It's what you pay attention to is the fulcrum of your life, isn't it? Do you pay attention to the love between two people? Do you pay attention to, gratitude that there is a creation, that there are the beautiful trees and the late sunlight outside my window? What you pay attention to is suddenly a hateful meme or, soft pornography dressed up on a Facebook or Instagram site, or envy, mimetic desire, that you should envy this influencer's fantastic life and realize what a worm you are. And you need to get their course right now so that you can have all these classic cars and go to Monaco, whatever, have a yacht. It's deeply troubling. Sometimes I think like we've opened up the astral plane or something, that technology has just made the astral plane explicit. And it's a shit show, isn't it? It's a circus. The astral plane's always been a circus. And, there are beings and potentialities and genuine spiritual true ideas within that can lead you away from it. And there's a lot of other darker aspects of the carnival.
Yeah, I mean, I notice myself feeling progressively worse for every minute I spend on social media these days, to the point where I have to get an app blocker that blocks it off for hours and hours a day, and only gives me like 15-minute like hits, because it's just getting, especially with the reels with the 60-second videos. And I can't focus. I don't feel good. I feel like
I can't watch shorts. I literally can't watch them, because it's already hard. I already read less than I used to. Admittedly, I listen to long format, high quality podcasts. Brief shout out, by the way, to Professor Michael Sergiu, whose daughter put his old lectures on philosophy and Great Western literature online from the 80s. What a wonderful speaker. I mean, you can literally get just truly high grade talks, a dedicated mind sharing stuff.
How do you spell
I love
his name?
that side. Sergiu, yes. Surgue. Professor Michael Sergiu.
Okay.
There's a great 64 lecture series on Western philosophy and a great one on Western literature and the Bible. He's just a great guy. So there's this high classic stuff out there. I've got to acknowledge that. But literally reels, they do something to me where I have to I just don't watch any of them ever. They're quite sickening and quite immediately,
it's
aren't
probably, us older generation at this point probably get more like, I get almost anxiety. I feel almost like, this is too much. I can't, this is just overflow of information, and I short circuit almost my mind. I have to kind of like put it away. But the problem is now this younger generation, I don't know if you saw the research, Generation Z, for the first time is less intelligent, has a lower IQ than the previous generation. You always, usually the newer generation kind of becomes more intelligent or, evolves from the past generation. And now we have this information overload, and obviously ties into Uranus and Gemini, where people are just cannot hold attention anymore. They cannot read long form. They're literally being programmed. And you're right, even from a spiritual perspective, you see Steiner's view, everything, we're being bombarded with all kinds of energies and beings coming through these devices, information, which we're just getting influenced by. But how does this tie in? Because Uranus, like you mentioned, is a trauma response. So how does this work together?
It can be.
Right.
Yeah, because the long-term memory holds all sorts of things, including perhaps inspiration too. But obviously the long-term memory is going to also hold more intense psychic events of any kind, including, what is trauma? Effectively, so much intensity that it knocked your centering completely offline. That is a psychologically pragmatic definition of trauma. It's something that knocked you out on whatever level. So the long-term memory is going to hold events of psychic intensity. By the way, and I'll draw back to this, but our generation, Bernardo, we're roughly the same age. We didn't have a laptop. I didn't have a laptop till my Saturn return, maybe 27, when I was studying astrology. We're the generation that can perceive embeddedly, we can feel the embodied difference or disembodied difference of this change. And it's going to be important, I think, what people of our generation, how we orientate to the change, or offer maybe hopefully a bridge to people who have just been more immersed in it right from the off. And obviously they're going to be more skillful than us in other ways. So long-term memory is an enormously complex subject, but if we're really honest with ourselves, if you think about it from Plato's anamnesis, you must remember your origins, Gurdjieff's self-remembering. Memory is like a thread to our greater depth. Why do people not follow the thread? It makes me feel of like the way the occult is portrayed in horror films or something. It's all vampires and evil magicians possessing people, right? Rather than a genuine ritualized attempt to engage higher insight or higher power. To follow the thread to the depth of the psyche, we must be prepared to encounter whatever we come across. Reminds me of my dream last night, where I was in this enormous hidden house inside a hotel, 25,000 square feet I was living in the center of London, that also had a beach. But anyway, and a room at the top with a drum kit and all these cool guitars, in the bedroom. But anyway, that, needless to say, it was some kind of comment about the room of many mansions. When you want to follow the thread to depth, you have to be prepared to encounter that which kept you away from depth or the truth. And that's where we encounter the memories of what we could call trauma, which is when we were knocked out by the pain, when we were knocked out by the loss or what happened. So it seems to me, for a deeper holistic engagement, to journey through what Jung might have called shadow to some sort of greater depth, to find your way through the darkness to the inner teacher, you have to open to all the parts of yourself that turned away from reality because it was unbearable. And that includes an acknowledgement of both, events in this life that have been deeply painful or shaped you, but also the subtle resonances within of past memory.
Yeah, and maybe we can talk a little bit about perhaps how this Uranus in Gemini may be reflective of the children incarnating right now, or maybe the collective themes of our times. I found something very interesting in I think it was one of your Uranus talks where you talked about Uranus in Gemini, or the third house, relating to trauma when someone disagrees with your perspective, which we already see that where differing viewpoints are now harmful or dangerous, and everyone's retreating into echo chambers. And then there's a corresponding or correlating theme where people with Uranus in Gemini have been persecuted for their speech in past lives. So, and there's this kind of pervasive perspective we see with a lot of people where they feel like speaking their perspective is dangerous. Like if you say the wrong thing, it could destroy your life. So I thought we were kind of like heading away from this, but it seems with Uranus entering Gemini, do you think this is going to heighten? And what would you suggest to people who have this kind of hypervigilance around how their words will land, or this idea that, we can't listen to different perspectives? How would you suggest people work with that from an evolutionary astrology perspective?
I mean, I think it's a product of anxiety, isn't it? Tremendous anxiety that then gets projected. I think we can trace a number of the things from even superheroes taking over movies. You don't want a real person. You want this magical person that can like reorientate reality and save people from wars and stuff. And then this personalized form of the anxiety to do with the battle of ideas. I mean, clearly this is extraordinarily detrimental. And I would argue the evolutionary goal of Uranus and Gemini would actually be to step back from that and see the polarizing, that for some people, Uranus and Gemini could trine Pluto in Aquarius, provide the necessary detachment to see the culture war, to see dialogues, to see these kind of argumentative spaces, or these spaces where the argument is shut down because it's unbearable to people, as the immature thing that is. I mean, society has found it. I mean, if you think about it, Gemini on another level is the Silk Road, or, bartering hands, the kind of trade routes that galvanized the world, that brought trade into Venice and other Italian ports, that, cultivated the Renaissance, admittedly cultivated the bubonic plague also. But that's the problem with open networks, isn't it? That it's not easily determined. But I would see that there's a chance. Look, to me, it's to do with, does it sound elitist? I don't mean it to, but the level of consciousness of the individual.
Yeah.
If you're shutting people's thoughts down, I mean, you're acting like a child, aren't you? Like an infant tantrum, not wanting to listen to a potentially corrective point of view, or it might not be. It might just be straight up wrong. But a mature person can still listen to it and go, no, don't think so. Right? This is the bedrock of human civilizational discourse. We seem to be unraveling. I think I'll take it back to that Saturn flight. There is a maturation crisis in the culture, because it is effectively only children that you don't tell certain things to. You protect children from certain narratives for their own developmental stage. You cannot do this in adult life and expect the civilization to be creative or dynamic in an effective way. And I guess, the impact on the educational system too. An example recently, and temporarily my daughter was in a different school and she's moved now, partly because of this, but not only. And in this school, a kind of, public in American sense school, like just open to the public school, a young boy was only allowed in for 2 hours in the morning. He was excluded the rest of the time, but he would punch the teacher. He would scream, "I hate you," with the teacher. He would pick up chairs like he's going to throw them. My daughter would just come back at night and write in her journal, like, "He kicked off again. Oh my God," And she said she saw the teacher go out once and just go into the corridor and go, and then go back in. Yet when they're in the classroom, these teachers were like, "Oh, we love you. Oh, you're all right," as he's screaming, "I hate you," right?
Yeah.
And the fantasy is what? All this child needs is love and extra time and support, and everything will be okay, right? And this just seems to be a prevailing stance in public education, in a certain aspect of society that feels anxious about the degree of cruelty or threat or struggle in the world. And I'm not saying this kid should be vilified. This is a young child. Good luck to them. I hope they get some special attention. But what I'm saying is this kind of all these people need is love is arguably an immature stance to an immature problem.
Yeah. And what is love?
Yes. Well, because it's love without Saturn, isn't it? It's love without boundary. Even parents are scared to be the bad parent. Never mind teachers or people in universities or state institutions. You got to be the bad parent. Sometimes you got to be the bad guy if it's about holding a boundary for the sake of, the articulation of a more cultured response. And so I witnessed it on every level. I think it is improving. I think there always was a silent majority that didn't like that shutting down. I mean, we're not going to suddenly immediately move away from these extremes, are we?
But isn't that the issue, what you just pointed out, hinted at the beginning, and that's what been really profound for me with evolutionary astrology, that it considers different levels of consciousness. Consensus, individuate, spiritualized, how a chart manifests, goes very much related, I'm sure, your way of David Hawkins' work, his map of consciousness.
Yes.
Right. And we can say maybe this has been abused, distorted over this thousands of years of the case system and all of this. But there's a deeper truth in that. In our materialistic world, we're so removed from it. We're trying to treat everybody the same because we don't understand the inner world of someone. Right. And then, especially in the educational system, it's just this unified curriculum for everyone, or even culture. It's all of it, even social justice solutions, all of it is through this oversimplified lens of uniformity, that everybody is just the same, right?
Well, it's false unity, right? It takes a genuine spiritual idea, the unitive field, and it places it on the wrong level, right? Which is some just kind of like human, equitable kind of stance. Humans are not the same. It becomes obvious to people in sport. It's the brilliance of sport, right? The 5'2" intellectual's not going to take over the NBA, right? It's just so obvious, right? It's so obvious, right? And so we need to remember that obvious in the other domains, right? That psychically, people are fundamentally different. People are coming from fundamentally different motivational stances. I mean, Hawkins was vilified, and you guys are based in Sedona, that I spent a lot of time in the Hawkins community. And he was vilified for, so-called elitist maps of consciousness, hierarchical maps of consciousness. But I would argue again, this is the flight from Saturn. You don't get a good Uranus if you don't have a strong Saturn. You don't get a good outcome of Uranus if you've run away from the Saturn foundational structural dilemma. And not recognizing there are levels of consciousness is a fundamental Saturn failing as much as it is a Uranus. And projecting that's just a dark hierarchy, like some corrupt thing. No, there are real hierarchies. They're not just corrupt, just like there are top tier soccer teams and not so good soccer teams. No one vilifies the people in the lower league soccer teams. No one's saying Billy, who's a plumber who plays for a lower league side, is a terrible person.
Yeah.
We have to understand it's not about simple judgments. It's about the recognition of the shapes that reality itself takes. And, you know, a lot of emotional regression has been justified around this lack of being able to think things through or speak things out loud.
So how would you suggest, just on a practical level, people hold this tension between Saturn and Uranus and maybe use that tension to become more mature developmentally in these times, which it seems like what you're pointing to? Is it something you need to do in like stages, like solidify the Saturn? What would that look like in someone's lives before you go into that Uranian field? Or what would you say to that?
Great question, and it would take different forms at different points in life, obviously. But the Saturn maturation project is, past a certain point, relatively simple if you take it from first principles. And I'm thinking Maslow's humanistic psychology. You know, you have to recognize your agency is now. You have to start where you are, and you have to provisionally accept it, even if it's a bit of fake it till you make it. Right? You can't just be blaming XYZ person, your family, the government, your situation, your job, your supervisor, your girlfriend, your boyfriend, your spiritual teacher, the people you listen to on a podcast, whatever. You got to stop it and start where you are and form, in that sense, a plan, you know, a plan of action around the mature principles of taking responsibility for your life and acting in over periods of time, Saturn, not excessively long. But I mean, I put it to anyone listening to this. If you took it seriously for 18 months, how long is that in your whole life? It's amazing what you can do in a period of time if you withdraw the use of your psychic battery to play out victimization narratives, blame, so-and-so should have done more for me, etc. So Saturn is the acknowledgement of the responsibility, the burden of your own consciousness, fundamentally. Because that's going to serve your individuation, Uranus. You can't open up to the greater nonlinear fields of your soul memory if you haven't accepted the basics.
But isn't that exactly David Hawkins' threshold, 200, right?
Yes.
The victim blame consciousness, 75, 80%, which humanity is caught in, that somebody needs to blame for all of this, you know, I'm entitled to this and that and all of that.
Yeah, well, the entitlement would be the pride. The blame would come from earlier, you know, fears, anxieties, sadness, you know, just the distress of not having the courage and integrity. So Hawkins' fundamental line was courage and integrity. So why courage first? Because you have to be brave enough to stop lying to yourself. You can't find your integrity until you encounter that fundamental obstacle and you disconnect, you unplug the part of you that wants to rationalize and justify your life to some hidden authority figure or to your friends or to the people you're attracted to that makes you seem progressively like you're better than you are. And yet inwardly you feel disjointed, victimized, and like people should have given you more. You have to break that. Yeah.
I mean, he also said something very profound about how the whole energy field reverses once you start taking self-responsibility. And I noticed this within myself because I think it was right before my Saturn return, I was always blaming someone. I was caught in a lot of like left-leaning narratives that was like capitalism or the patriarchy that was to blame, or, you know, the bad experiences I've had. And the moment I started accepting complete self-responsibility for what I could do, my whole life shifted very quickly and everything started to move upwards, right? But as long as I was stuck in this disempowering narrative that there was systems outside of me that were to blame, whether it was racism or white supremacy or whatever, I was stuck in this field where progressively worse things would happen to me. And the moment I said I was responsible for everything, I was just going to do what I can to work and heal myself and to create a life that was meaningful to me, everything in my life began to shift very quickly. It was very fascinating.
It's what he called buoyancy at one point, or that's an extension of his work that I've taken into my work. You fundamentally go onto the waterline. You're with the flow of the stream at that point, instead of bobbing or fighting or being swirled by cross currents. It is fundamentally life-changing.
Is that
I mean,
Saturn
it's not
like taking that? Is that will be Saturn taking that responsibility?
the Saturn is the understanding of limitation in the responsibility. Yes, it involves all of you at that point. I mean, it transcends the chart at the level that Laura was just saying it, because your I comes into being, your actual, the thing that unifies the whole chart, if you like, because there's a martial element, there's your value, Venus element, there's the clarity of your mind, you know, there's your developmental self, the moon, there's your essence, the sun. But I think it is a Saturn boundary, because to make that shift, you have to stop something. You have to stop the story that produced the turbulence. And the stopping is a Saturn act, because you have to say, no, I am actually this. It's in this limited thing that my real your I cannot arise without the limit, without saying, no, this is who I am, not all these other things, not the fantasy self, not the me that was more attractive at school and all the girls love me that I made up, or the me that's a better person than I actually am, or the me that's more successful or least successful, depending on how masochistic your fantasies are. So it's that correspondence to the reality, because you could argue, couldn't you, that all of this is just increasing your sense of inner reality and its correspondence with others, community, the maturing effects of others' reality too. It's not just a solipsistic process. It's the increase in reality, isn't it? Hawkins said you were moving with life at that point rather than against it. That's the thing. You're tacking with the life current instead of going away from it. Of course, everything changes. And there used to be a sense that the culture supported that insight too, and that's more questionable at this point. You know, it's not just an inner thing past a certain point, is it too? To be fair to people, I'm not trying to make them feel victimized again, but some cultures support that insight more progressively than others.
Yeah. And just to kind of close up, I mean, it's interesting you mentioned the term reality and Saturn, because we're progressively moving further away from reality with AI. We don't know what's real anymore. Like, we don't know if something we see is true or not. Like, even when I'm on Twitter, I never know if it's like half the time or even more when I look something up, it's not even true. So how would one, from an inner perspective, develop that reality principle within themselves?
Exactly. Oh yeah, have I told you guys that I'm actually discovered I'm going to live forever, and I've started selling some supplements. You know, if you guys are interested, just exactly. Let's talk. Yeah, because nothing should be impossible. You know, to the billionaire or the rich Western person. You know, we should overcome death. We should overcome, you know, whatever illness, and it's trumped up as progressive. It's humble, isn't it, right? We're going to be born, we're going to struggle towards things. Some will be more valuable than others. We're going to struggle to love, we're going to struggle to connect, and that struggle is meaningful. And then we're going to grow old and die, right? You've got to clock that there is a limit in all of this. There's so much in this one time around. That's all you can do. But once you grasp that and accept it and begin to put your all into that something you can do, it's truly extraordinary what can occur. And these might be subtle changes. I'm not trying to do a narrative here like you'll suddenly be successful, famous, or rich. No, you might have really great friends and loving connections in your life and walk with your head held high and, you know, undertake work and projects in your life in this way that you put your back into it because you really believe in it. The human life, I don't know, we've got to cast aside the fairy dust and see that the real magic is rooted in a kind of humility. It is rooted in a kind of simplicity, in a way, directness of the human experience. No AI can take you away from the fact that your life is unique. And it was granted to you, I would argue, from the sacred dimension of life, in order to look out through these eyes and with this heart and this mind and take part in the divinity of life as part of it.
Mm-hmm.
Beautiful. Yeah, so we'll just touch on what we're going to talk about in the second hour. So there's a lot that we wanted to cover. Maybe we can just touch a little bit about Pluto and Aquarius, kind of what we see going on with that. And then also one really interesting topic, I think you mentioned this, is Pluto's orbit slowing down. What that might mean, meaning Pluto transits are going to become rarer, longer. The midlife Pluto square will no longer happen in midlife. Very fascinating. Maybe talk a little bit about just Pluto transits in general and Uranus transits, and then get into this idea of Uranus, which is going to square the nodes. What are the dates for that again, when that's going to happen?
Wow, good question. I have my animate page up here and I can just live do it. I mean, it will come into exact, because it properly races into Gemini, doesn't it? It's kind of hovered back and forth and then it races in. They are exactly square in June and into July.
Yeah.
But they're within range by, of a few degrees by May.
Yeah.
End of May. Yeah.
Very fascinating.
It's quite soon. Yeah.
Yeah. So we'll talk about planets squaring the nodes, outer planets squaring the nodes, Uranus squaring the nodes, some themes that you maybe have seen. Maybe you've checked up about the history of this and what might happen. And, and I'd also love to touch on how one might work with this nodal square, both individually, if you have that kind of stuff in your chart, and maybe collectively as well.
Yeah, it's very fascinating, this nodal square.
Yes.
Like planets squaring the nodes. Really fascinating to dive into that. Because
it's changed my view of astrology. I'd have said years ago, helping someone understand their Saturn or a natal placement would have been a primary goal in a reading. Now, if a person does have planets squaring the nodes, it's a primary goal of mine that we try and understand that, because it could be so instrumental in altering the course or have a blind spot element to it that the right kind of conversation could illuminate in such a constructive way.
Okay, beautiful. Excellent. So again, for any listeners who want to access second hour, not members yet, you can sign up at my website, veilofreality.com/membership. Have access to over, I think, 170 episodes now, all the second hours. And thank you so much, Mark, for joining, and we'll be right back.